Welcome to On Texas Football. Time for the Saturday morning conversation. I've got a special guest this morning, Chris Childers, host of The Full Ride on SiriusXM channel 84. He co-hosted, actually, I guess, with Rick Neuheisel, the former college football coach at Washington, Colorado, UCLA, etc. Chris, how you doing this morning, buddy?
I'm doing really good. It's always good to talk to you and see you, man. Thanks a lot for having me.
Well, Chris, you and I go, 25 years back now?
At
Is
least
that
now,
about
yeah.
right?
Golly.
Yeah. But before we had gray hair and kids that were older and all that other stuff, Chris and I got our start together at rivals.com. Chris actually helped us put together the first ever college football show for Sirius at one point back in the mid 2000s. And so it's awesome to see you, Chris, and good to hear your voice and whatnot. Hey, you're now on with Coach Neuheisel, and you've been following college football professionally for 20 plus years, so you've seen a lot of change. We're going to have a little bit of a discussion here about a number of topics, but the one I wanted to start with you is this. Over our lifetimes in the last 20, 25 years, we've seen kind of a coalescence of conferences from Power 6 conferences. Now we're down to Power 4. There is something to be said that maybe really there's just a Power 2 that's driving the engine with the SEC and Big Ten, and the Big 12 and ACC just have to get on board or be good with whatever they decide. Where do you see that going? Is it going to get even deeper, in your opinion, based on your conversations with the Big Ten? Because I know you've talked to Petit, I know you've talked to Sankey, et cetera, interviewed those guys. Where do you see this going, in your opinion?
I don't think it's slowing down. They were all together yesterday, Petit and Sankey, and the two commissioners from the Big 12 and the ACC, which I think was symbolic in certain ways, because Phillips and Brett Yormark, essentially, they have to be linked to those guys. They're 3 and 4 in a pecking order right now, which is not a great place to be, but it's better than being 5th and beyond. So I think those guys are kind of, nuzzling up to the power, which is Sankey and Petit. And, really and truly, I look at it, I know those guys are the faces of it, Tony Petit and Greg Sankey, and they're doing everything they can to maximize the financials of their league. And their presidents are happy. They're raking in money hand over fist. But really and truly, who I look at, and I do think it's bad acting. I mean, I think when you have taken the Pac-12 and murdered it, and the West Coast has pretty much nothing. I mean, there's no representation. And the only fault it had was, well, Larry Scott was a bad commissioner, but the biggest fault that it had is its time zone. Yep. They play late games, and it screwed it within TV. What happened was this. You saw this. You were a part of this in the .com revolution, right? So, like when Rivals and everything was growing and the 24/7s and all that, you also saw at the same time of the .coms, you saw streaming start to develop. You start all these TV, and now, you and I back in the day used to watch television like Seinfeld. You'd watch on the same night. ER, you'd watch on the same night, and advertisers and networks could kind of adjust. Well, as streaming evolved, it became a thing where live programming is God. It is the king, and that's how these networks are going to maximize money. Well, what sells? Sports. What's the most popular sport? Football. Well, in football, unlike the NFL and college football, you have all these different leagues negotiating. If you look at things comparatively, they actually get college football at a hell of a bargain compared to the NFL when you look at the numbers that it draws. So in my eyes, you have Jimmy Pitaro of ESPN, and then you have the guy that runs Fox, and they're pulling the strings here. They're the puppeteers because they are the ones that have the money, and they're the ones that are essentially ESPN will pay you, or SEC will pay you this, Big Ten will pay you that, and they're the ones that have essentially moved the teams into different leagues. They're the ones that have pulled the strings. They've okayed teams moving here, UCLA, etc. So to me, it's the networks that have caused this, and the villains that are going to be, or heroes, whatever way you want to look at it, that are going to get the credit for it is going to be Greg Sankey and Tony Petit. You've known me a long time. You know that I support the little guy.
Yeah.
I think we've murdered the little guy and we're killing the middle guy, or we've murdered the little guy and we're killing the middle guy too, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I get it. And I don't disagree. So your theory in large part is that you don't see the slowing down of the formalization or the coalescence of the top leagues anytime soon, in part because they're trying to get to that higher dollar like the NFL gets, because you're saying, look, college football, if they're piecemeal like they are now, whether it's the ACC or the Big Ten or nobody's all under one roof. If they keep that up, that's going to be better off to be piecemeal. But what Sankey and Petiti are saying, let's get it all under one roof and then really charge some money.
100%.
So, yeah, so it's
100%. And like the NFL, I mean, if you look at what the Sunday ticket got alone, let alone the actual tier 1 rights for the NFL, it's astonishing because they're organized. We are like the stupid ass version of the NFL. And it's funny because we're so popular. I mean, go to Austin, Texas, go to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, go anywhere, and you're going to see, I mean, you visit Birmingham, Alabama, and this sport resonates. And here's what's so messed up about it, because we're not organized. I truly believe, and you would know this as an entrepreneur, maybe better than me, as somebody who's looked at numbers, but I think we're leaving a lot of money on the table. And I think that the smarter people realize that.
Yeah. And so maybe that's what they're trying to do with the college football playoff. Why Petiti and Sankey want 4 teams in that playoff if it goes to 16, and are kind of going to dictate terms if they do put it that way. And maybe everybody gets brought along for the ride, but there are some unique situations in college football. Notre Dame being an independent is one of them, in my opinion. And so I think Notre Dame probably goes along with the Big Ten and SEC, because the SEC and Big Ten want this idea of, hey, conference champions don't need to be the one that get the buys, for example. The top 4 teams need to get buys. So I think that Notre Dame is along for that ride because they see themselves somewhat situated well enough within that infrastructure to live on. All right. You mentioned something that you called it disorganized or lack of organization, the house settlement that's going on right now.
Oh, boy.
And Rick Neuheisel, listen to him a lot. Think he's really smart about this subject. He's long advocated players getting paid. And I've agreed with him for 15, 20 years almost. What is your take, Chris, on the house settlement? Players, is this, like, I think it's just kicking the can down the road again, instead of getting into collective bargaining for these players. So I hate to say this, but what college football, I think, needs, and college sports as a whole needs, is something that they can truly grab onto. I think that what colleges are hoping to grab onto is this house settlement, but it doesn't go far enough. What are you hearing behind the scenes and from talking to people that you guys interview on your show, and how you see that?
Everybody's scared because it's going to massively dig into their pockets. And I think there is this kind of worry of, what it does from a competitive perspective. How did the collective still fit into it? I think you're trying to figure out the new normal. What just pisses me off about it, though, is that we let it get to this point. Is that, people like me, and I'm always ashamed of when I look back at the way that I covered the Terrell Pryor situation that was over tattoos, something you and I could trade whatever the hell we wanted to for tattoos, and nobody would bat an eyelash. And Roger Goodell,
I'm tattoo free, baby.
Right? But I'm saying, like, we could if we wanted to. And it's like Roger Goodell upheld a 6-game suspension. What they were doing, this all goes back to the 1980s. In the 1980s, you were allowed to, negotiate your deals outside of the conference, right? So everybody kind of had their own deal. And the Supreme Court, I forget who it was, but the guy who is the lead justice said that the NCAA can do what it has to do to protect amateurism. Well, 1984, they weren't making the money they were making in 2020 or 21 or whatever. So the money just ballooned. but they had this Supreme Court ruling in the 80s that allowed them to be greedy as hell. Now, if you looked at it and looked at what happened to Reggie Bush and Sherrell Pryor, it was anti-American as hell. It was anti-capitalist as hell. But we just sat back and like, yeah, you villains, how dare you, trade your tattoos for money. I mean, it's insanity when we look back on it. So the fact that it got to this point and it's so messy is kind of embarrassing, because like my friend who is a congressman, Mark Walker from North Carolina, former congressman, but he was one of the initial people that introduced legislation, and the NCAA lawyers, like 7 years ago, marched into his office and said, "This is never going to happen. How dare you? What are you trying to do?" And the guy's like, you guys lack foresight, and it's coming fast. Well, 2 years later, the floodgates opened. And so now it's a scramble, right? And the House settlement is another way to scramble. I just hope we get to a point where it's all clean. We have a clean revenue share, and we could stop digging into the pockets constantly of the boosters, constantly of the fan. College football is getting far too expensive. It is. If you are a fan of any means, they are calling you, they are harassing you. And at some point you're like, I am tapped, guys. Like, I didn't get rich by giving you my money. And I love my school, but don't get me wrong. Like, this has got to stop. At some point we have to have an efficiency to it. And I think that's why you saw them in Washington this week again. I mean, this has been many times where they're begging, you guys got to fix it. It's up to you.
Well, I look at it, and so let's take the University of Texas, which is uniquely situated. They're, if not the top revenue gatherer, one or two or three with Ohio State, maybe. I think Texas did $330 million in revenue last year. This new proposal, including scholarships, puts the outflow at around $30 million a year. $20 million in house settlement money, and another $10 million towards scholarships. You probably add the salaries of the Steve Sarkisians and Sean Millers and Jim Schlossnagels of the world. You may get up to around 50 million, 60 million, whatever the number is. The problem with that is that in the NFL, it's roughly a 50-50 revenue versus. So you're not, even if you get up to 60 million a year, okay, you're not close to paying the employees, the people that are on the field, that 50% percentage. You're more in the 10 to 15, 20% range. And so I think that's where players are ultimately going to have to coalesce and argue for collective bargaining. That's why I think it's just.
It has to be. It has to be, because what'll happen until we have collective bargaining, we're just going to end up in the same spot. The NCAA is going to make rules, and somebody's going to sue their ass, and they're going to lose. And then we're going to just keep doing this until there's some sort of, which is the way, it's common sense. Let the person who is generating the revenue have a seat at the table. This isn't hard, but they've been so greedy for so long, and they've enjoyed it. I mean, you have seen these campuses. They've enjoyed the money piles that have been stockpiling up on the backs of these kids. And now you got to deal with it. It came to a head. We're living in a society right now that is so divided. And this Supreme Court currently can't agree on anything. But in 2021, 9-0 against the NCAA. That's how screwed up it was. I think that speaks volumes. 9-0.
Yeah. All right. Before we start the next topic, I want to ask you about something that I think is interesting. That idea of who's going to lead us out of this. But first, I want to say thank you to our sponsor of the Saturday Conversation. All right, we got an open house. Laura Baker, our special realtor friend from Keller Williams and the Andy Allen team. She has an open house today that she wants to invite you guys to if you're in and around the Austin area, over in the Onion Creek area, from Saturday 2 to 4, 11208 Mickelson Drive. Again, reach out to Laura, 11208 Mickelson Drive. Thank you, Laura, for sponsoring On Texas Football and your team over at Keller Williams. Again, that's 11208 Mickelson Drive. Make sure you give Laura a call, 512-784-0505. All right, thank you, Laura. Chris, the thing I want to say about this if you don't mind, is the idea of, okay, who's going to lead us out of this? Well, the SEC has Sankey, Tony Petitti has the Big Ten, but do we need a commissioner of sorts for college sports? I was reading this the other day, or for just for college football, by the way, which is the far and away moneymaker outside of the NCAA basketball tournament for college sports. And I was reading a list that included Mac Brown, which we've had on the show. Rick Neuheisel has been on with us before too. But Rick Neuheisel's name came up. And you've been doing a show with him, a daily show with him for what? How long now? I mean, it's
a long time. 13 years, 14. Wow.
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah.
He also does his stuff on television as well. What do you think about him as a commissioner? What do you think his overarching ideas would be? I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, if he got that job, he'd be perfect. If that job existed and he were the one that was named for it, he'd be perfect. And I think he explains why every morning when he's on the radio. What's so weird about it is, Rick and I have been together for over a decade, and most of the things that he says eventually will happen. But it's like a really grind process to get to this thing that was smart, that would have worked, that he said, 5-6 years ago. Like that happens literally all the time. And we'll be like, yeah, remember when we talked about it, on the show in 2014. So Rick is very good. Rick's got a law degree from USC. He was a guy who had a chance to go to Princeton as an undergrad, chose to walk on at UCLA because Terry Donahue said, oh, that's okay. You go to Princeton if you think you're not good enough to play at and he took that as a okay, I'm coming here then. And, he went on to have great success and was a Rose Bowl MVP. So I think he made a good decision, but smart guy. My whole point is he's a smart guy. And what's interesting about it is that he would look at it down to a science from a numbers perspective and say, we got to do it this way. And then, but I guarantee you the first thing he would do is that television would be one umbrella, just like the NFL. We are one thing. We're going to have universal ruling. We're going to have universal scheduling. We're going to have universal officiating standards. All those things need to come, right? So I think that would be somebody who would really do a nice job of having a plan, being able to implement the plan, and having it be organized in a way where everybody would understand that, hey, this would work because of this reason. Not just because, hey, I'm going to do this and not explain to you why. There's things that happen in the world sometimes in politics where you're like, hey, if this is good for us, can you tell me why it's going to happen? So I know why. Like Rick is good at that. Here's why it makes sense. An example of that would be like I brought up with the television, but just, distribution in general, recruiting, all kinds of different things where he's kind of looked not at the reality, but what the reality can be. And he's lived it. I mean, he's been through this. And what he always jokes about, which is why I think we need a commissioner more than anything. And you probably know this, having been around as long as you have. These coaches are a very, very, very paranoid group of people.
Yeah.
And getting them to agree on anything. Like there were things that Rick would say they would discuss, back in the day at whatever meeting, Big 12 meeting, Pac-12 meeting, etc. And it was just common sense. Like, we need to get this rule. But you couldn't get everybody to unanimously agree because in the back of their mind, they'd be like, well, how does this screw me? How is this guy's idea getting it over on me? And so, no, and maybe it's a lack of intelligence. I don't know. Who the hell knows what it is with some of these guys, but they're paranoid. Mike Singletary was notorious for being paranoid in Rick's Alliance of American Football meetings when it came to stuff. So it's just a part of it. You need to take the paranoia out of it. You need to have, and I think he would be perfect for that because he's the kind of guy that will explain it to you to where you're like, well, it would be dumb if we didn't do that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that he would be terrific in some ways. One of which being that he recognizes maybe some of his own faults in previous iterations, if that makes sense. So I think that he's also been around long enough that he doesn't just have the coaching experience. He's been a player. He also has the television media experience now. So he's got all three pillars. I'm not sitting here saying, "Oh,
no, he'd be great.
Rick Neuheisel for commissioner." I'm not, but someone that has all three of those pieces together are one of them. I will say this: if you think college football coaches are paranoid, I think that university presidents are paranoid, if not more so. So that's another hurdle that a commissioner would have to step through, I think, and really be a part of. Chris, last thing I had for you as we look at this, all college football in general, Texas is not having a spring game. There will be a couple spring games later today. Ohio State's having one, Florida, Georgia. What do you make of that? What are your thoughts on it? Is Sark makes sure to tell people that it's not because of the portal. He wants to go more to an OTA model, NFL model, where he literally is not sitting there worrying about the spring game as much as he is making his practices count. And the spring game, for lack of a better term, is not even a glorified practice. You know, you get 45, 50, 60 plays in and you go call it a day. It's not really, you only get 15 practices a year in the spring. So what are your thoughts about that? You know, I feel like a little bit of a loss as a Texas fan, somebody that's followed Texas for so long. They are going to have a fan appreciation day, but what are your thoughts on that in general? Is it an issue that you see?
Well, it's again, and I don't believe Sark. I think paranoia is a part of it. You don't want you don't want people to see your players. You don't want collectives making offers. That's just a part of it. So am I going to miss spring games? Not really. I mean, I like spring games as a kid because I could go to Notre Dame and get autographs. That was it. I was in 8th grade and I had my football and I could, get Ron Paulus to sign my football. And that was exciting. But the game didn't matter. I didn't even know the scoring system. It was like the defense scored for score. I mean, it was like, I don't even know what I'm watching. It's not football. So really it was, I think we convinced ourselves that it was fun just based on the fact that we could go to campus and watch our team and, wear the t-shirt and the hat and all that. But the game itself really was a painful drag to get through, even for the most ardent football fans. So from that perspective, I won't miss it. I wish what Syracuse and Colorado suggested would have happened. I think if we have, the NFL preseason or the inner scrimmage kind of model that's controlled where the quarterbacks wear the black shirt or whatever, that would be awesome. And I would be all in. And I think, again, from a money perspective, that would generate some level of money. It would be a revenue boost. So we know they love money. So I think that would be good. But I think we're in a world right now where they realize the spring game is it's an exercise that doesn't matter. Plus, how many years have we seen guys just not want to do it because of injuries? They don't have enough players to put together 2 teams. And I was guest coaching a spring game one time for Vanderbilt when James Franklin was there with the offensive line, where me and Herb Hand, you probably know Herb.
Yep.
Me and Herb were running sideline to sideline because his offensive line had to go both ways.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous. I'm like, at this point, it's like, what are you doing?
He had that issue at Texas too, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's just like, at this point, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. So I'm fine with it. If we have inter squad and stuff like that down the road and play other teams, that's cool. But I think most coaches are right. Those days were a waste anyway. You watered it down. It was vanilla. You didn't show anything, and you would have gotten a lot more out of a closed practice.
All right. I lied to you. I told you it was the last one. It's not. And here's why.
Okay.
I'm going to say 2 words.
Yeah.
Arch Manning.
I love him. I love Arch.
Here's my point. It evokes a response.
Yeah. You either love him or hate him. Or you either believe in him or you don't.
Yeah.
And we both know people that don't believe in him. I love him. I have been around him a wee little bit. But I just think his demeanor, his aura, he handles being a Manning as well as anybody could possibly handle being a Manning at that age. And God bless him. I think he's going to be special. I'm excited.
Yeah. All right. Chris Childers, again, from 8 to 11 Central on Sirius 84, co-host with the great Rick Neuheisel, the former coach. He used to be a San Antonio gunslinger quarterback. Yep. I knew one of his receivers on that team. But anyways, Chris, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck, continued luck in your efforts there at SiriusXM. You guys do a terrific job.
Thanks, Bobby. It's good to be here, man. Thank you.
Hey, I want to see a hook 'em from you, dude.
You got it.
There we go. There we go. Y'all take care now.